Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Plectroverse. I am John Tron Davidson from Heavy Repping, and I am here with guitarist for Ashen and all-round top dude, Nadz from Arcanum Plectra. Nadz, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, my friend. It is wonderful to see you and hear you, obviously, in this context.
It's been too long, my friend.
It has indeed been too long, and so much has changed since the last time we conversed in this manner. Now, we shall come on to all of that stuff in due time. As is customary here at the Plectroverse, I just want you to give our beautiful listeners, who are all very handsome and tall, a little rundown on how you got into doing what you're doing with Arcanum.
Okay, so I mean, we've spoken before in that interview a while back, but for those who don't know, actually, John got me into doing what I'm doing. Up until I rifled through his collection, I was still using green, blue, and purple Tortex. Those were my kind of go-to thicknesses, and I was like, I think that's about thick enough. But after trying a few things, kind of 2.5 mil upwards, I was like, whole new worlds opened up to me. And then, kind of one day, I just, in my lunch break, decided that I was going to try making my own out of bits of materials I had laying around at work, some aluminium, some steel, bits and bobs like that. I came up with something quite functional. So decided to kind of buy some plastics and some other materials and come up with a design and actually kind of really get into it. So yeah, and that's kind of led naturally to where we are today.
Now, for the listeners who aren't aware of this, and obviously some in the community are, what is your fabrication background prior to becoming a plectruer?
So my fabrication background prior to this is I'm actually an orthotic technician. So that's creating specialist bespoke orthoses for people that have got problems with their feet, problems with their legs, diabetic insoles, things like that. So we make leg braces, insoles. We do build-ups on shoes for people who've got one leg shorter than the other, things like that. So it's although it's on limbs and feet and like quite big things, the brackets that we work to are in millimeters. So if someone just needs their foot tilting 2 millimeters one way or the other, we make the orthoses that does that, and you'd be amazed at the difference that actually makes to someone's quality of life, or their gait, or how they're standing. Just these little tweaks here and there of like minuscule proportions actually makes a massive amount of difference on like the alignment of the spine and things like that. So whilst I was working on big things, it's actually to tweak the smallest kind of changes in a person's body. So I'm used to working in like millimeters and smaller. So
what you're saying is that the transition from your previous or existing skill set to working on such a small scale as PIX, where you're dealing mostly in millimeters and hundreds of millimeters and so on, it's not that there. It's not something you would normally think to apply to this sort of area, but they're not too far apart by any
not
stretch
particularly. No, but once you're used to working on such a small scale, it's easy to transfer that to other materials and other products, really.
So speaking of, we've spoken a little bit about fabric, the actual materials that you've used, and I'm very lucky to have, for those listeners who are not aware, I've got some of your earliest work in my collection.
Yes, you have.
Like going way back.
You've got one of my, you've got one of my aluminium prototypes. I think you actually still own the Trimaxion, don't you?
Yeah,
the
origins of it. Yeah.
Named, the Trimaxion, which was named after the spaceship in Flight of the Navigator.
Nice, great movie.
Yeah.
Proper films. Yours is a very different journey from everybody else, because most of the guys in the community came to plastics first, or they came from wood and they went from wood into plastics. but you started with aluminium, like you said, and then I've got some stuff from you that was UHMWPE, and then you went into acrylics. Yeah. So did you find?
Yeah.
What I know what made you choose that transition, but what was the experience like going from working on casts and orthotics and so on, then going into metal, then out of metal into some of the hardest plastic going, and then into the stuff that you're using now?
Yeah, well, I mean, the transition from metalwork into UHMWPE wasn't that big. It was just it was the initial getting used to the material because I'd never worked with it before. But you know, when you're working with tools that are used to grinding harder materials and materials that do give a lot of resistance, actually working with UHMWPE was actually quite nice. It was a nice change. It was very forgiving, but I personally didn't like the tone of UHMWPE. I know a lot of people do, you yourself included. But to me, for my personal taste, it just sounded a bit. There wasn't enough attack to it, and I know that acrylic tends to have that kind of plink to it, that plinky sound. But I actually quite like that attack that it gives me for the kind of music that I play, which is kind of like progressive metal. That kind of area. Yeah, so I just like the tone that acrylic gives me, and that was really the only thing that caused me to jump to acrylic over any other things. Obviously it's a lot softer material to work with, but in my day job I've worked with EVA foams and all sorts of other really soft materials, so it was kind of well within my comfort bracket to work with.
Yeah. And have you had it's funny that you mentioned that, actually, because Lawrence, who I interviewed recently, plays a similar style. His is a bit more metalcore-y than the stuff that you do.
Yeah.
But he's one of the few people to come out openly and say, I dig the chirp. You know, I want it because I want it to be really aggressive, and those two things are very much married together. UHMWPE is a softer, more blooming sort of tone, but then that's its nature because it's so dense. Now, I've seen you go from obviously the early stuff and you've been using acetate recently. To make some of these incredible pieces, the real swirly sort of like that insane pink one on the Barbarian that people have seen on the Instagram and all the rest of it. Did you? Yeah. Is it? And you'll forgive me because I'm not a fabricating person. I'm curious to know. Do you find that obviously? Sure. Do you use using the same sort of tools to do all that work, or do you find you need to have a slightly different approach from material to material?
I mean, only very slightly. I mean, the acetate, it does very much act quite a lot like a much more forgiving acrylic. I find it is slightly more resistant to working, but that just gives me a longer lasting pick. So, you know, it's absolutely fine. And the joy of acetate is when you come to polish and buff it, it comes up absolutely beautifully, and you can really dig in on your buffing wheel and really get that good shine on it because it's not going to distort or warp the bevels or the edges or anything like that.
Yeah. Do you find it's in practice? Because I know obviously you use all your picks live, and I know Chrissy, your bassist, uses your picks as well. Do you find that?
Yeah, and so does Barrett actually.
Oh, really?
Barrett started using them as well.
You see, it spreads.
Yeah, it does.
But do you find that? And this is the thing I'm curious about, because we talk often about. It tends to be, as a general rule, that the people in the community, in the guitar community at least, the people that favour the thicker plectrums tend to be people who are more open to things like extended scale and fan fretting and the heavier side of things, which of course goes hand in hand with using thicker gauges of string. Do you find that material, or which of the materials you work with, do you find is sort of the most appropriate or the hardest wearing for when you're tuning down and you're using heavier gauges?
I think acetate personally has been my favourite so far. Although I'm really excited to explore that with another really hard but natural material in Tagua, because experimenting with that, I found that it really is quite a hard wearing material. So for the current materials that I'm working with, it really acetate wins in that regard, I think. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what else I can use going forward.
I will say that those of you who have seen the insane half Chimera thing that I got recently, it's wonderful to see. Tagua has tended to be, the approach has tended to be to use it as a core rather than as the, like when it comes to thicker stuff, as the entire plectrum. And I think there's a lot more, I'm a big fan of Tagua anyway. But I think it's really cool to see it being used in a heavier setting. It's a very difficult material to get consistency with, at that thickness, just because the nature of the material is the void and all that sort of thing. So but I think it's a great material for the application, and it's cool to see it being used in that wider sense. Now, speaking of the picks themselves. One of the things that is interesting about Arcanum, I think, and I would like you to talk about this a little bit because you are much more knowledgeable about this than me, is the fact that Arcanum is one of the few companies that's got almost like a lore around the picks themselves, because most guys tend to do this is my model this and this is my model that, but you actually took the time to come up with characters for the picks, and I would like you to just sort of extrapolate a little bit on the background of that, because I think that's a really interesting thing for the listeners to hear.
It just comes from my eternal need to do something more. I mean, from a, and I don't like using this term, but from a marketing standpoint, I wanted something extra anyway. I wanted to kind of like stand out a bit, have some cool shapes that were also practical. But that wasn't enough for me. I'm a massive nerd, as you know. I have a weekly D&D session. It used to be more. I used to have 3 sessions a week, but due to time constraints now that I find myself in, I've had to cut down to the 1. But yeah, I mean, I just wanted that something extra, and I wanted to come up with, well, why is the pick made out of this color material? Why does it look swirly? Why this, that, and the other? And that's where the lore started to come in. I thought, well, why not fuse my passions, music, and my Dungeons and Dragons-y nerdage? So I thought, I came up with my first shape, which was the cleric, and that is your standard size pick essentially. And I thought, well, what does every adventuring party need? A cleric. Everyone needs a cleric. You've always got to have that one stalwart kind of thing that you need, like a healer that can also act as a little bit of a damage soaker. And I thought, well, everyone needs a cleric. Let's call it that, because that's your standard pick. And then I came up with, when I wanted to make variations and different sizes, I came up with the rogue for my Jazz 3 size. And the idea about the rogue is that it's small and nimble, and it can do attacks from the shadows really quickly, and so that's where the rogue came in, because it's 4 shredders, so it moves across the strings quickly. It's accurate. And then obviously the Barbarian, which is my triple tipped, my take on the classic triangle essentially.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, it's got 3 tips, and when a barbarian goes into a frenzied rage at a certain level, they get 3 attacks per round. So it just made sense. Yeah,
that's very cool. Actually.
So yeah. I mean, there's different rules for different types of barbarian and fighter and stuff, and we could speak all day about that. But back in the day when I first got into D&D, the maximum number of attacks a barbarian could get in a round was 3. So that's what I went with. And then obviously those are just the shape names, and after that I had like all these different colours. I was like, well, why is this one black? It's because it's made out of the scales of a black dragon. And why is this one red? It's because it's made out of a special kind of magical crystal. Things like that. And I just came up with stories for each of the original colorways, and it just kind of went from there.
But it's a very interesting thing, and I spoke about this a little bit with a couple of the other people I've been speaking to recently, and talking about we'll come on to talking about the community in due course. But one of the interesting things is that this, and I'm all for the normalization, as is the modern parlance, but I'm all for the normalization of saying, I'm actually interested in something, so I want to share that with other people. I think that's it's a deeply undersold thing, and we both know not to get too Lance Storm on this, if I may be serious for a moment. But we both know, and a lot of people in the community know, a lot of musicians know what it's like to be into something that other people aren't interested in.
Yeah.
And I think that if you are into a thing, and that informs your work, and it informs your work ethos, then celebrate that in what you're doing. You know, which is why I want
totally.
to. Now, speaking of influences, to come on to this, because obviously we have talked about this at length, and I'm reasonably comfortable in saying that I know who you're going to mention here, but the people that once you got into the game, because I think it was if memory serves, the pick that made you change from the stuff you were using previously to getting into the heavy side of things was a Woodland Cast pick.
It was. Yeah. Big
shout outs to crews at Woodland Cast. Hello.
But
who were once you got Arcanum underway and you started making and you went past the Ice King, which I think was your original shape with the flick, and you started getting into the modern era of Arcanum, who were the people that influenced what you were doing? Like the other makers, I mean, within the community.
Yeah, I bought a couple of bits and bobs from a couple of people just to explore, and I was particularly interested in Iron Age because the shapes that he was coming out with were just inspired, brilliant. I was quite interested in finding something that was my own shape, and what he was doing was brilliant. And I was like, well, I need to get on board that ship really. Obviously Chrys at Woodland started me off down this path really, because he was also doing insane stuff. He still is doing insane stuff with his picks, and then I just started exploring. So I would say Iron Age, Crows, again, awesome stuff at Crows. Oh goodness, I'm trying to remember all the original guys that I started collecting. And of course Brock at BHL. I got one of his U glass ones.
U glass is the serious action. Yeah. For sure.
Well, that was another level of durability. That is. I'm sure it was actually. I'm pretty sure that one was actually taking my strings apart at one point. I was really punishing my strings with it and seeing what it could do, and it was really holding up. So I was really impressed with that. But in terms of my influence for giving myself permission to step outside of the box and not just do your standard pick shapes, it was certainly Iron Age opened my eyes to that, and I thought, well, as long as the part of the pick that you're putting to the string is functional, you can do whatever you like with the rest of the area, as long as it's comfortable. And one of the surprising things when I made my first cleric with the sweep, when I first cut it out, I was looking at it, and I was thinking, well, that might dig into my finger a bit. And the more I started to play it just nestled in really nicely. It gave me an extra degree of control over the pick. And I found, because I've got quite a slippery grip, usually with an acrylic pick, it will turn around in my fingers as I'm playing, and I'll have to keep on readjusting. But that little flick sat really nicely in the crook of my finger and stopped it from going anywhere. So it was like a happy accident, really. It looked cool, but it was also a functional piece of the pick.
It is interesting, like the more that, and a couple of people I've spoken to have said a similar thing, that the more that you go on, the more you make your own stuff, the more, just by dint of the fact that you're making the gear, you start to explore the potential of ergonomics and obviously beveling and that sort of thing, but the upper sections and how you want it to swell out. And I mean, you mentioned Brock, who's the great connector to all the interviews I've done recently. But his stuff, he's got that very slight concave and convex thing going on picks like the Hodor and all that. But that's not something that happens straight out of the gate. Like you've got to go there, and I think it's important to remember, if you were obviously people who are listening to this, that you see it in stuff like the Dunlop Flow series now, where the old Flow series it's got the prime tone grips, but the new stuff's got double concaves on the front and back. They're evolving that as they're going along. You can only do that by making stuff first and seeing how you go on with it.
Yeah.
Now
it's starting to catch up.
Exactly. So coming back to the picks that you were using before you got into this, seeing as we're now talking in the distant future of the present day, you came from using much more normal off the peg stuff round about the 1 mil mark for sake of argument.
Yeah.
And now you're using picks that are 3 times that thick.
Yeah.
This is a double question, if you like. How did you find the transition going from using thinner stuff to what you're using now? And for somebody who is thinking about making that leap, who maybe hasn't got into the heavy stuff yet, what is your case for heavy plectrums?
They just sound better. And really, when you've been playing one for, I'd say give it 2 hours. Give it 2 hours of your time. It's worth doing the research, because you do find that a thicker pick can be so expressive. I think a lot of people think, a thick pick is just going to be really hard all the time, but they really don't have to be. And when you have one with a really nice bevel, they just glide through the strings. It's just worth giving it your time. And when you want to go hard, it's got it in spades, and you can just keep going, and it'll give you everything you need. And the other reason is your wrist just gets less tired. Everything is so much easier with a thicker pick. It moves through the strings nicely. You have to use much less grip pressure. You don't have to worry about it falling out of your hand, because it's a big chunky bit of gear. Just give it a go. Honestly, I think now that I've been playing picks that are 3 mil upwards, I'm also using like 6 and 7 mil picks now, and it brings something new to your playing, and it opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
It's interesting, isn't it? Like, I found that, and I'm sure you've probably found the same, that the biggest obstacle to people getting into the heavy stuff is the fact that they often don't get the opportunity to try them in person.
Yeah. And
I found at work, particularly when I've always had, piles of them in my pockets or whatever, and say, if I'm asking somebody, always, whatever they're buying, always say, like, what pick are you using? Just because I'm curious. And they go, oh, I'm using this, or, I just use it, blah, blah. And it amazes me still how many guitarists, particularly guitarists, I have to say, either I use whatever's lying around, which isn't true, because they might say that, but they don't want to go over 0.7, whatever. Or they say, oh, I use this and I've been using it forever. I understand why that circumstance is the way it is, because shops, it's harder to stock items at that level. But every time I've given somebody the opportunity to try something heavier, when they go back to what they were using before, they go, well, where's all my power gone? Where's my depth gone? Where's my control gone?
Yeah.
And I think
it's crazy. It is crazy.
Well, rather than it being a gatekeeping issue, I think it's a question of giving people the opportunity. Because if they do that, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be money. But although I do think you get more pick the higher up you go, in terms of the sculpting and all that, and then you get into the collector's grade stuff, and that's a whole other, ballpark entirely. So you've now been in the pick community, like full fat in the pick community for the last year and a half, thereabouts.
I guess it's time's moving weird at the moment, but I'm guessing it's about a year and a half. Yeah.
Yeah. And how has the experience, and this is a very broad question, but how has the experience of the community been for you as a maker and what have you?
The community has been excellent. I haven't had a single negative experience. Everyone's full of love for each other's products. Everyone's so free with their advice. Everyone's propping each other up. Every time there's an opportunity to kind of help get your fellow maker out there, everyone is helping out. I get tagged in posts all the time. They're like, oh, check out Nadz of Arcanum, and likewise I've been tagging a whole bunch of other people when I can get on the social media. Time is not in abundance these days, but every opportunity I get, I'm always kind of trying to prop everyone else up, and it's just a behavior that it becomes automatic because everyone's doing it in the community. You just pick it up. So yeah, it's one of the best communities I think, especially online, that I've ever been involved with.
And I know it's not the norm for the guitar community to be so positive.
No, not at all.
But that is the nature of online conduct, and we could have a whole discussion about that, but we're not going to do that now. However, given that you were talking about how supportive everybody is, I'm going to ask you and put that to the test. The question that nobody likes, but I'm going to ask it anyway. There's a lot of guys out there, a lot of makers out there.
Yeah.
But in your estimation, and this is as a bloke, not necessarily as a company, your top who's doing the good work? Your top 3 makers right now.
3 is difficult.
3 is always
off
difficult.
The top of my head,
it's 3/4, but you can just try and limit yourself to 3.
All right. Well, okay, then I'm going to be brutal, and I'm just going to do the top 3 off the top of my head. I think Dragon picks, Honey picks, and Plectrums handcrafted on Etsy.
Yep.
Those are the guys I'm consistently impressed with their work. It's just they're kind of at the level that I aspire to, and every time I finish a pick, I just think what is that going to look like next to someone else's Instagram photo out of those 3, and I always just try to push myself to get that finish and that polish on everything.
Excellent. Thank you for actually being straight up and just going, nope, it's this. That's cool. Now, as we are coming into the dying embers of this glorious broadcast, can you inform our wonderful people out there in the community what is next for Arcanum? What have you got coming up?
So on a kind of enforced break at the moment. I don't have my workshop space available, but I'm really, really excited for what's coming up. I'm going to be continuing with my Wizard's Alchemy series because everyone likes a swirly pick. But in addition to that, I'm hopefully I'm going to be creating my own resins, my own colorways, things that are unique to Arcanum. I'm also, which we briefly touched on earlier on, I've got the Chimera series coming out. So named because they incorporate a number of different materials in the one pick. So it's going to be mainly wood with a Tagua core or a wood Tagua and epoxy hybrid. So that's going to be really, I'm really looking forward to that as well. And I'm moving into the chunk territory. And this is inspired. This is inspired by because I don't usually do custom orders, but Iron Cat, bless him, he got in contact and he was like, I want you to make some stuff for me. I was like, okay. And he says, I only play 12 and 13 mil. And I was like, okay. So yeah. So that has kind of forced my hand and pushed me to explore the chunkier territory. So I do have a model coming out that is going to be there's going to be 3 sizes, and that's going to be 6, 9, and 12 mil. And
nice
to start off with, it's just going to be it's just going to be the cleric to start off with, but I will be exploring thicker versions of the rogue. And definitely thicker versions of the Barbarian later on as well.
Awesome. No, the patron saint of the Plectroverse goes pretty hard, man. Like he's
yeah, man.
It's like
Iron Cat is just awesome. He is so awesome. And the thing is as well, I don't know if he does this for other makers, but when he contacts me, he talks to me like we're role playing in a D&D game. The wording of his messages is just absolutely brilliant. So he's, man, he gets involved, and I can't thank him enough for making me go the way of the thickness.
Yeah, it's the old Church of Thick is he is a great believer in that, I think, which is wonderful.
Yeah, definitely.
So massive thanks to you for coming on the show, Nadz. It's always a pleasure. We've known each other a long time.
Thanks, man.
But I don't take these things for granted. Is there, before you head off and wasp into the ether, or wisp into the ether, whatever the adjective is, or verb, or word, it's fine. Before you head off, is there anybody you want to give big shout outs to? Now is your opportunity to do it, inside or outside the community.
Oh man, everyone in the Plectroverse as a whole. I mean, I can't thank them enough for all the support, the advice, just keeping my mood up. In particular, obviously, Chrys at Woodland for starting me down this path, because it was his work that inspired me to start in the first place. Massive shout outs to everyone that I mentioned before, including and also Tridents, Market Hippie, and definitely huge props to Iron Cat, because he's just the dude, isn't he?
Yeah.
Whenever he visits you on Instagram, you really know about it, and he's just such a lovely guy. And hopefully one day, he and I can meet up in Osaka and go get some kushikatsu together.
Yeah, that'd be
awesome. Just everyone, man. Everyone's just awesome. So thank you to the Plectroverse Collective. You're all wonderful.
Excellent. Right, well, massive, super extra best, many immediate thanks to Nadz for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. If you would like to hear any more about Arcanum Plectra and all of Nad's other activities, you can go to the links in the description of this episode. If you would like to come and join me next time, I'll be talking to the infinitely magical Chrys Johnson of Players Pick podcast and Keisel guitars. Very much looking forward to that. However, that is all from us today here on the show. So from myself, John Tron Davidson, and from Nadz,
goodbye.
I will see you in due course. So thank you for listening to the Plectroverse. If you're not sure what to do in life, remember, rep hard, rep heavy, and we'll see you soon.